In the tradition of Malcolm X, peace be unto you. Perceiving slave experiences through modern social lenses will always lead away from historical objectivity. And that is a problem that in the communities of descendants of slaves, we are wrestling with. If our goal is to do objective analysis of both what happened to slaves and why it happened, we are limited to credible records, eyewitness reports, or biographies of their acts and descriptions of the many contexts in which they acted out their lives. Very often, we choose from our vantage point to apply moral laws to evaluate slave life, but the issue arises: what sources do those moral laws derive from? From what philosophy? Should we just make up an ethical philosophy and apply it retroactively? Should we derive a practical ethical morality from our contemporary lifestyles? I don't think that would work. Should we evaluate slave experiences with utilitarian interests in mind? Or should we take moral values from the Bible? As for me, I don't have a problem separating God from the Bible. What I mean by that is, God exists, but very little of the Bible is about the light that is God. With that in mind, a question arises for me. Should we use both the Old and New Testaments, assuming that moral values in both were devised by men for their circumstantial purposes? After all, white supremacists use both of those sources to justify slavery. And rightly so, because the Bible is explicit in its endorsement of the institution of slavery and the perpetuation of social inequality over time. What white supremacists used were classical religious mythologies and philosophies of Europe, Africa, India, and West Asia to justify and or rationalize and execute systems of slavery and extortion. The foundation of modern empires is slavery and extortion. For them, the Bible justifies relations of dominance and subordination as natural and even necessary. That is to say, as natural law. So, if we were to apply the Bible retroactively to understand slaves, their feelings, their thoughts, the emotional aspect of their lives, how could we condemn slavery using the Bible? If we did so, wouldn't we be committing a contradiction? Wouldn't we, descendants of slaves, find ourselves justifying slavery, at least impliedly? Because I don't think we would consciously do so. But understanding the context of the Bible leaves us open for making grave mistakes. Would that make it more likely, for instance, that descendants of slaves could conceivably aspire to be slave masters themselves? I ask that because enslavement and exploitation of other human beings is defined to be morally good in the Bible. Thus, to be a morally good Christian, one must accept the precept that justifies slavery. Is that the will of God? The Bible was the moral context in pre-Civil War America and thereafter. It fed the people of that time a belief in the moral goodness of slavery. For example, let's look at the Torah. And I quote, "Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you, and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly, end quote. That's in Leviticus 25, verses 44, 46. In the New Testament, and I quote, slaves, obey your earthly masters with deep respect and fear. Serve them sincerely as you would serve Christ, end quote. That's in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. In this verse, slave masters are given equal status with Jesus Christ, who for Christians is God. That equivalence made slave masters gods on earth. That functioned well for white supremacists because it served their business interests to have wealth and power by exploiting African labor. It is still the context of white supremacists today because most of them believe the Bible as history and truth. Ironically, some slaves and later freed slaves adopted the Bible as their moral compass. Putting God aside for me, it is clear that one who claims to be both free and Christian commits an oxymoron. That means the two orientations are incompatible. To be a Christian is to believe in divinely sanctioned roles of both slave and slave master. In fact, free and Christian are mutually exclusive concepts for those very reasons. Doesn't it say also, know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, end quote? I can only conclude that the Bible is not a moral compass. It never was, nor will be, nor can be. If you subscribe in the idea of the inherent dignity of all human beings, and if you recognize that as a universal precept, use Christianity and you will keep churning out the same social results as that of the Bronze Age and the Iron Age empires. There is a kind of logic that drives the whole culture that orients itself around these moral precepts in the Bible. And it always turns out the same result, no matter where it is applied. There is no past so-called civilization that existed which did not rely on some form of slavery and extortion, which we call today taxation, to grow wealth for an elite caste or class of social predators. During the past 6,000 years of human social history, slavery was and is still justified in nearly all of the surviving so-called civilizations. Now here's another problem. Looking backward, we cannot retroactively apply new perceptions of morality and make sense of what happened in the past any more than Bronze and Iron Age mythologies are working well for us today. Doing so will not change what has happened, and applying Bronze and Iron Age myths will not make our current life situations better. We cannot change the past because we cannot step twice into the same river. Interpretations don't change the past. What we can do, though, is gain wisdom. With wisdom, we can plot a new course for our lives if it is based upon truth. That truth will set us free. I am Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Peace be unto you.